we saw that the first practice is one of concentration. And I would recommend, because sometimes there is the idea that these are three stages in meditation. We will see these three steps, concentration and then meditation and then what in Theosophy is called contemplation. But I would say, practice concentration or meditations to concentrate your mind for a few years, and then some other techniques may help. Don't think that concentration is just a preliminary aspect that can be passed over and then jump into something else, because if we cannot focus our minds, then the something else normally doesn't work or doesn't, we cannot go deep enough. But then we have this other practice, which, in Theosophy is called meditation. This is what in Hinduism, for example, in Hinduism, they use the Sanskrit word dharana for concentration, and then dhyana for samadhi. And this is what in Buddhism sometimes they call vipassana. So the second kind of exercise, which is meditation in this tradition, it is said to come always after concentration. Ernest Wood says meditation is preceded always by concentration. Concentration produces a very wide awake consciousness at its best, and in meditation this wide awakeness is preserved and applied to full reflection upon a chosen subject. So the idea is that with a focused mind, then there are different things we can do, and these are the different techniques of meditation. The techniques for concentration are about quieting the mind, fixing the mind, producing a kind of stillness. The techniques of meditation are techniques in which we use that mind, which is now, under the control of the inner self, that is focused, that can be directed as a more potent tool, and we use that mind for different, with different aims. It may be an inquiry, trying to perceive the real in us. Well, we will see some of the different things that we can do. Now, we can apply any of these techniques with a mind that is only superficially focused, and sure, the technique, the practice of meditation is good enough, but normally it's not going to, we are not going to be able to go too deep with a mind that is not really focused. So for this reason, it's better to spend some time in learning to focus the mind before going into these techniques of meditation. Ernest Wood here mentions reflection upon a chosen subject. This is one of the techniques of reflection on spiritual aspects. This is what in Buddhism, for example, they call sometimes analysis meditation. Some of the main practices is after one has learned to still the mind, one should meditate. They have like these 4 truths or points. I'm not referring to the four noble truths, but the question of, how precious the human birth is, because only in human form we can attain liberation. The question of impermanence, karma and reincarnation. Perhaps also the question that our personal self is impermanent, is not really a self, it's just a collection of thoughts. So there are several important spiritual teachings that many times we have them just as information, and they don't really affect our lives. We may believe in reincarnation, have some information about reincarnation,
but we still live our lives as if this was the only important moment of life, and we don't really look at life from a wider perspective. Or we may believe in karma, but the moment that something happens that we don't like it, we resent it. So it is important to meditate on these important spiritual teachings, and that is one of the techniques of meditation, one that is quite used widely in theosophical practice, and this is what Ernest Wood was referring to in particular. Now, as I said, there are different techniques. Like, these are 7 techniques. There are some other, but I did at some point like a research and a compilation of the different techniques that are available in theosophical literature, taught or recommended by different theosophists, and I put them on this website, theosophy.org. So one of the techniques is this meditation on spiritual concepts that I was talking about. Then there is a meditation on virtues. Then there is a meditation in the heart, drawing the consciousness to the heart center. Then there is a meditation on the master or a divine being or a deity. This involves visualization. There is a meditation on the one life. There are different ways of doing this. In some aspect, it's more like this analysis meditation, trying to realize the one life that is behind all diversity. But in other approaches, it's more like trying to connect to the one life that is in nature. Then there is a meditation on the bodies and raising our consciousness from the different levels, from the physical to the emotional, the mental, and beyond, to a more essential aspect of ourselves. And then there is Blavatsky proposed like a diagram of meditation that is also quite interesting. So these are different examples of techniques of meditation. As we go through this webinar, different series, we will take some of these different techniques every now and then. As I said, a whole webinar on meditation, sometimes people don't have enough time to practice, so we get relatively little sharing, and I don't know how useful it gets if it is just the lectures. But every now and then we will approach some of these techniques. Now, ideally, in my view, as I said, we should work for some time focusing on our minds, learning to focus our minds, concentrate them before we try these techniques. But we don't necessarily need to wait. We can always have at the beginning of our meditation a period of concentration, and then go on to this technique. And how deep we can follow the technique, or how deep we can go following this technique, will depend on how much our mind is focused to some extent. But as time passes, we can keep doing that technique, and if we are also spending time in concentrating the mind, then that's something we can do. But if we are in no rush in trying different techniques, I would say it's worth spending time in just learning to focus the mind, at least to some extent. So, and then this question that we were talking about, seeing results. Leadbeater says a mistake that many people make is to suppose that a meditation which is unsatisfactory to them is therefore ineffectual. In the work of our meditation, sometimes we feel happy and uplifted, and sometimes not. But in both cases alike, it has been acting for our higher bodies, the meditation. It is pleasanter
when you have what you call a good meditation. But in fact, the only difference between what seems good, a good one, and a bad one lies in its effect upon the feelings and not in the real work which it does towards our evolution. So this is an important point, because one of our problems is that we judge everything in terms of feelings. Something makes me feel good, it is good. It makes me feel bad, it is bad. Whether it is a person, a situation, an object, or the practice of meditation. But that is a very superficial way of looking at things. Even wrong things can make us feel good, and right things can make us feel bad. How we feel about something is no real, gauge for whether something is good or not. And as Leadbeater says here, the meditation, and he explains at length this in his writings, the practice of meditation works from top to bottom, from above to below. The changes in our practice of meditation begin to happen first at the level of the mental body. And then as the mental body begins to be, because this is basically a mental activity. There is an instance in meditation in which we go beyond the mind, but the stage of or the practice of concentration and these techniques of meditation are basically a mental activity. So the most of the effect of the practice of concentration and meditation is at the level of the mental body first. That's where the change begins. And Leadbeater says, when a clairvoyant looks at a person as the person practices through the years, the clairvoyant can see the changes at the level of the mental body, although at the physical level, the physical awareness may not notice much difference. The physical awareness, our physical consciousness that we have right now, is the most obscure of all the levels of consciousness we have, is where there is the least wisdom, where we are the least sensitive. It is the last chain or the last link in the chain of causation. So when things happen on the physical plane, they are all news on the inner planes. So it's not a reliable point of judging any of this, and not even life, because it's the only thing we are aware of. It becomes our whole universe. But the spiritual practice, little by little, begins to give us, at first, like in this intuitive, semi-conscious feeling that there is something more than this. And we should keep it in mind, not to judge our practice of meditation by what we can see in this very low, heavy, obscure plane of consciousness. So he would say the idea is that the first effect is on the mental body, which starts reorganizing itself, developing, purifying itself, developing strength and abilities, and then that begins to reshape the emotional body. And then as that proceeds, it begins to appear on the physical consciousness. So it is important not to judge, too much our practice, or be disappointed by whatever happens on the physical plane. And then there is a third practice, which is contemplation, which is a deeper practice. And here again, this practice becomes really available after we have acquired to a good extent the ability of focusing our minds without struggle, without effort, just resting in a state of attention. That is the aim of the practice of concentration. Then when the mind has the ability to use that concentration or that focus to work on whatever that mind is working on, whether it is an inquiry or a visualization or this or that, where the mind becomes a pliable instrument. And then once those two skills are fairly developed, then may come this contemplation aspect or practice. Let's see what Leadbeater says about this. He says, when meditation has become an established habit in you, and when you can manage it fairly well without any feeling of strain or difficulty, and without a single wandering thought ever venturing to intrude itself, then you may turn to the third stage of our effort, contemplation. So this, once you develop the skills of concentration and meditation, then you can engage with these exercises basically without being distracted. You are either visualizing something, or you are thinking about something, or you are watching something, and basically, you don't get distracted. And then comes the possibility of practicing something else, a different technique, to put it in that way, which is contemplation. And we will see briefly this. Now he says, but remember that you will not succeed with this until you have entirely conquered the mind wandering. Annie Besant puts it this way: you have gradually made the vagrant mind steady by this process of slow and gradual curbing, and at last you are fixed on the central thought, or the central figure, and there you are poised. So that's in the technique of meditation you are doing. You are poised in, again, whatever you are doing in that particular meditation. And when the mind is poised there, you are not struggling to not to get distracted. She says, and now let even that go. Drop the central thought, the idea, the seed of meditation. Let everything go, but keep the mind in the position gained, the highest point reached, vigorous and alert. So, for example, if you read some mystical treatises like The Cloud of Unknowing, the author there, he's a Christian monk, that we don't know who he was, but the author there basically is talking about this contemplation. He's saying, leave behind everything, every activity of thinking, praying, memory, leave everything behind and just stay in this state of not knowing, in this state of silence and darkness, and stay there alert, but quiet. And this is basically what Annie Besant says: let everything go and stay in silence and darkness, in a state of silent awareness, basically. And that kind of exercise in which there is no object of meditation, there is no mental activity, there is simply resting in quiet awareness, this is what is called contemplation in theosophical literature. So Jeffrey Hodgson, for example, another theosophist, says, when we then dwell in utter silence upon the very essence of the idea which has been chosen, eventually even that essence falls away, and the soul is left in darkness and alone. In that silence, the voice of the divine is heard, and in the darkness, the light eternal shines. So there is a whole, this is a whole subject in itself, the subject of silence. But the idea is to, as we stay in silence and darkness, little by little, subtler aspects of ourselves begin to appear, to shine. And we begin to be more familiar with deeper aspects of ourselves. And then eventually that becomes very visible, and that also is let go of. And so in that new silence that is beyond what was the silence before, subtler aspects of ourselves begin to emerge. So this is again part of the overall process of the inner journey, the process of self-knowledge, knowing ourselves in deeper and deeper levels. But this part of the journey can come or can be traversed effectively after we have trained our minds previously with concentration and meditation. Typically, as I said, there are people who may come with a more of a tendency for that, and that's the result of whatever, either work on those lines in a previous life, or that this personality has the tendency to be quiet, whatever the case. But generally speaking, there is the need of developing first these early skills. And then Anibesan says, don't try to do this too vigorously at the beginning, because it tends to bring about a headache. It is better not to persist against that. A headache means that you are straining the nervous mechanism of the brain, which you must not do. And this could be applied to any of these stages of meditation. If we get a headache, it's that we are forcing the brain and the nervous system too much, and we should never do that. And yes, to stay in silence at the beginning, it can be quite strenuous, and the person may get tense trying to sustain the silence. But eventually, as everything else, it becomes natural and spontaneous, and one can rest in the silence. There is no more effort there. The one that is seen is always the soul. When the soul sees with the sense of I am thoughts and emotions, that is what we call the personality. When the soul sees beyond the sense of I am the thoughts and the emotions, that is what we call the soul. And there are many levels to the soul. So the soul is not an object that we see. And the personality also is not an object that we see. I mean, yes, thoughts are objects of perception, emotions also. But there is only one seer. That one seer is the soul. The soul is not an independent principle. Soul is simply a state. These are all states, not separate objects. So what we call soul is consciousness that is not confused. What we call ego is consciousness that is confused. So the one that is behind is always consciousness. It's not that there is a soul separate from the personality. But anyway, we have to stop here. We can discuss this as we proceed in these webinars. Thank you everybody for your attention.